The final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 4857 in the name of Christina McKelvey on Migrants' Rights Day. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. Christina McKelvey can't be with us this evening for understandable reasons, and so I call on Sandra White to open the debate on her behalf. Ms White, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Christina McKelvey on securing this debate and wish her a speedy recovery. I'm sure Christina would have been absolutely fantastic, and I hope I can say as much as she would want to say also. Presiding Officer and fellow members, it's an honour to lead today's members' debate to celebrate Migrants' Rights Day and also to mark the 22nd anniversary of the International Convention of the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1990. As the United Nations say, throughout human history, migration has been a courageous expression of the individual's will to overcome adversity and to live a better life. As globalisation has increased, the ability and desire to migrate has also increased. In the last 10 years alone, the total number of international migrants has increased from an estimated 150 million to 214 million. It is also interesting to note that today women account for 49% of migrants worldwide. Following on from the United Nations Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, the first round of high-level dialogue on international migration and development took place in 2006 and reaffirmed a number of key messages. Firstly, they underscored that international migration was a growing phenomenon and that it could make a positive contribution to development in countries of origin and countries of destination, provided it was supported by the right policies. Secondly, they emphasised that respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of all migrants were essential to reap the benefits of international migration. And thirdly, they recognised the importance of strengthening international cooperation on international migration bilaterally, regionally and globally. The next round of high-level dialogue will take place next year and will give Member States and their partners a chance to discuss practical measures to facilitate labour mobility, foster sustainable development and protect the rights of migrants, especially women and girls. Excuse me, Presiding Officer. Just quickly turn this page. As the Secretary-General says in his address to mark this year's Migrants' Rights Day, attention to the rights of migrants is especially important at this time of global economic and financial distress. As budgets tighten, we are seeing austerity measures that discriminate against migrant workers, xenophobic rhetoric that encourages violence against irregular migrants, and proposed immigration laws that allow the police to profile migrants with impunity. During economic downturns, it is worth remembering that whole sectors of the economy depend on migrant workers and migrant entrepreneurs to help to create jobs. When migration policies are developed without attention to vulnerability, marginalisation and discrimination, millions of migrants become cheap, disposable labour, the scapegoats for failed economic and social policies, and even casualties in an ill-defined war against illegal migration. It is a sad fact that at these times attitudes to migration harden, and I think we must ensure that here in Scotland we continue to welcome migrants who make a positive contribution to our society. It is therefore perhaps timely that only yesterday it was reported that Scotland's population has hit a record high of nearly 5.3 million people after a surge in inward migration and increased life expectancy. As the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs said, these figures represent an historic moment for our country. A decade and more of devolution has delivered a growing and record high population. That is not simply a sign of dynamic, attractive nations we are building. It is also a key factor in delivering economic growth in future years. And I think everyone here in this chamber will have amongst their constituents many first-class migrant workers, people who came here not just to work within our economy, help boost our economy, but help to enrich our country with their cultures and their attitudes. And I think they should be praised for that. Instead, sometimes we see in certain tabloid newspapers, as I've already mentioned, xenophobic comments and basically people, some politicians, who have a hard-line attitude I would say, a very wrong, hardline attitude towards migrant workers. And I think it's very important we have this debate today, and people within, not just Scotland, but throughout the world, can realise the worth of migrant workers. Now, one organisation which should be commended for the work it does in ensuring that migrants are welcome to Scotland and they are able to become involved in the community is Migrants-Rights Scotland, who, after setting up a separate organisation in Scotland in early 2010, have supported migrants here in Scotland in a number of ways, including through the support of migrant community organisations, or MCOs. Without these people, these volunteers, we wouldn't know what would happen to migrants in certain aspects, and I think it's incumbent upon us to pay tribute to the workers within Migrants-Rights Scotland for the hard work that they do and continue to do to ensure that migrants have a welcome in our country, and also, as I said previously, the culture they bring is very much welcomed. MCOs help migrants share information and expertise, whilst allowing them to become part of the local communities by putting them in touch with local organisations and encouraging them to get involved. So far, the work done by Migrants-Rights Scotland has been hugely successful. However, there is much concern over recent changes to immigration policy by the UK Government. Basically, have a detrimental impact on migration and even those who are long-term British citizens. Undoubtedly, the Minister will be aware of these changes and how they will adversely affect those already living here and those wishing to come here. And I wonder what discussions the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government in these regards. I also note that the portfolio of experiences currently being compiled by Migrants-Rights Scotland, entitled Migrants' Hopes and Fears, will be presented to the Family Migration Inquiry at Westminster early in 2013. However, I wonder once again if the Minister would consider the idea of setting up a migrants' conference here in Scotland to hear from those living in Scotland, in the hope of perhaps informing any future approach by the Scottish Government to the Westminster Government on this particular issue. And I would be interested to hear the Minister's reply. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would like to draw attention to the reception after today's members' debate in Committee Room 2 of the Scottish Parliament to bring together representatives of minority civil society groups, migrants and their families and MSPs to share deeper understanding of who counts as a migrant and the issues facing real people as a result of immigration policy, which I believe the Minister is also attending. So I would welcome members here today and others to come along to Committee Room 2 and hear the very real experiences that people here have experienced. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Now open up the debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. Helen Eadie, to be followed by Mark MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'd like as well to congratulate Christina McKelvey in her absence on securing this debate this evening. Those who know me well will know I do what I can to assist migrants, especially from Eastern Europe, in particular Bulgaria, a country which I have come to know well since 2006 when I first visited that beautiful country. I refer members to my register of interest, where I have a voluntary declaration in this regard. Every moment around the world, people leave their countries in search of a safer or better life. Globally, more than 214 million people are on the move. Many flee difficult conditions only to face even greater struggles, including human rights violations, poverty and discrimination. But these migrants have more than fear and uncertainty. They also possess hopes, courage and the resolve to build a better life. With the right support, they can contribute to society's progress. And I would agree with Sandra White's call for a migrants' conference. I think that would be an excellent idea in Scotland. Migration is a global issue that is rightly attracting more and more global attention. The United Nations General Assembly facilitates high-level dialogue on international migration and development, giving member states and their partners a chance to discuss practical measures to facilitate labour mobility, foster sustainable development and protect the rights of migrants, especially women and girls. Attention to the rights of migrants is especially important at this time of global economic and financial distress as budgets tighten. We are seeing austerity measures that discriminate against migrant workers, xenophobic rhetoric that encourages violence against irregular migrants, and can't read my writing. In some countries, proposed immigration laws that allow the police to profile migrants with impunity. During economic downturns, it is worth remembering that whole sectors of the economy depend on migrant workers, and migrant entrepreneurs help to create jobs. When migration policies are developed without attention to vulnerability, marginalisation and discrimination, millions of migrants become cheap, disposable labour, the scapegoats for failed economic and social policies, and even casualties in an ill-defined war against illegal migration. As human mobility becomes more complex and the journeys taken by migrants more perilous, it becomes all the more urgent to foster and forge national policy responses that address migration based on human rights principles. In the lead-up to the higher-level dialogue, I hope that Member States will approach human rights as a central issue in migration governance. At the national level, I encourage them to take such measures as decriminalising irregular migration, setting up effective alternatives to immigration detention, and ensuring that the functions of public service providers such as nurses or teachers are kept strictly separate from those of the immigration authorities. I also hope that participants will duly consider the issue of migration in the context of the post-2015 Global Development Agenda. As we mark International Migration Day, I join with others who call on states to ratify and implement all instruments on this issue, and to encourage all people to help foster a principled, practical and creative discussion on how we can ensure the protection of migrants across the world, wherever they are and whatever their status. And over our history, we have seen, for example, how Polish people fled from the terrors of Nazism. Many are still here today because of the friendship and security that they found in Scotland, and they made a life for themselves. In Fife, where I once chaired the Fife Regional Council Equal Opportunities Committee, there were 29 languages, and we established a community interpreting resource to ensure that appropriate help and support was given. And lastly, Presiding Officer, if anything was a defining moment of the Olympics amid so many defining moments, it was Mo Farah's victories. And wasn't that an amazing interview when he was asked, wouldn't you rather be running for Samaria? And he replied, this is my country, mate. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call Mark MacDonald to be followed by Annabel Goldie.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate my colleague Christina McKelvey for securing the debate and send my best wishes to her as she recovers. Can I also pay tribute to Sandra White, who I think did a fantastic job standing in for Christina at such short notice. Presiding Officer, I believe fundamentally that Scotland is and always has been an open and inclusive nation, a welcoming nation. I think migrants from across the world have enriched our land throughout our history, and we can see this in our education system. We heard last week a debate on the Camp Hill Scotland, which was founded by Austrian migrants. Our language, our architecture, our food, song, literature, wider cultural output, our sport, and even our politics, as my colleague Linda Fabiani was pointing out to me. She herself is of immigrant stock, and I'm sure everyone would agree that Linda has greatly enriched the politics of Scotland over her time. The important point to mention, Presiding Officer, is that immigration is not a dirty word, and I think far too often too many politicians, too many commentators use the terms migrant or immigrant in a pejorative sense, looking to cast a negative association with those words. And that's extremely dangerous rhetoric. I think Helen Eady was right to talk about issues of economic difficulty. And often when we enter times of economic difficulty, there is a tendency to look for a scapegoat, to look for a section of society who can be marginalised or blamed for the difficulties that ordinary Indigenous workers are facing. And very often that is the migrant communities who are targeted as the people who are taking away jobs from the Indigenous workforce. And we must be vigilant against that. We must reject those sentiments, whether they are explicit or indeed implicit. Or being made, there are some politicians who will make those statements in a much more explicit fashion than others, but the sentiment still exists, however it is put across. And we should also remember that migration is very much the key to Scotland's future. We talk a lot about the demographic challenges that Scotland will face as we go forward. We are going to face a situation where the number of people who require to be supported by the working age population will put a strain on the taxation base of our nation as we go forward. And that is just simple fact. We have to find a way to increase the working age population of Scotland, and the only way that we can do that is to attract skilled migrant workers to come to Scotland to make Scotland their home. And the difficulty that we face in trying to do that is that we are currently living in a situation where a government in Westminster is taking decisions around immigration which are seeking to solve a problem that doesn't exist in Scotland. We need immigration. We need to encourage immigration. I believe immigration is fundamentally a good thing in and of itself. Even if we take the economics out of it, I believe encouraging people to come to Scotland from elsewhere in the world enriches our land, irrespective of the economic argument. Simply by increasing the diversity of our communities, it enriches us, it helps us to develop new experiences as a people. But the only way that we can continue that cultural enrichment that I believe comes from migration, and I believe is celebrated through events such as Migrants-Rights Day, is, I believe passionately, through Scotland having its own control of its own immigration system. And I say that, and people can say that is a political point. Yes, it is. But I believe it is absolutely key to this, whether it's on the economic side, whether it's simply on the cultural enrichment side. I believe the UK government is taking the wrong approach. It's taking the wrong approach based on the negative perceptions of immigration that I have outlined previously. I believe it would be far better that we had the powers here in Scotland to do things in Scotland's interest when it comes to immigration. I commend Christina McKelvey for securing this debate, and I look forward to the day when Scotland has its own immigration policies.
Thank you. Annabel Goldie, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I thank Christina McKelvey for bringing this important issue to the Chamber, and I also thank Sandra White for her opening speech, and I do support the motion before us. I want to concentrate my remarks on Scotland. Historically, Scotland has been a country of net-out migration, but over the past 45 years, net-out migration has greatly reduced, and indeed every year since 2002, Scotland has experienced net migration gains of at least 19,000 per year. And in 2010-11, net migration was a gain of 27,000, the highest since estimates began in 1951. Now, some of the most recent and reliable data and information about migrants in Scotland was contained in the Scottish Parliamentary Equal Opportunities Committee report in 2010. It had carried out an inquiry into migration and also trafficking in Scotland, and it found out the following. It said there are demographic problems in Scotland. The report noted that the demographic projections of an ageing population and an increase in the number of workers with dependents has led to the view that Scotland will need to attract migrants in order to support the economy. Well, the committee was prescient because today we learn from the published results of the 2011 census that for the first time in Scotland there are more pensioners than young people. Now, that has huge implications for policy across a range of issues, but foremost amongst these has to be a sustainable economy. And the importance of the migrant population to the economy was rightly underlined by the committee report in 2010, and that importance is highlighted by the census data published today, which is why the other findings of the committee are so significant. The committee said there is a lack of reliable data. Well, I think that has to be addressed. We need to know the extent to which the economy depends on the migrant workforce, what skills and experience are being deployed, and in which sectors. The committee also pointed out there is a negative public perception of migration in Scotland, and some contributors have alluded to that. I think we all agree that is utterly unacceptable. People need to be educated about the asset which is our migrant population. Our economy would not be fully functioning without them. And the committee also observed there's a lack of awareness of migrants' entitlements, and the migrants themselves have a lack of knowledge and awareness about public services, rights and entitlements. Well, again, I think that's unacceptable. Surely in this day and age, with the benefits of technology, we can make a far better fist of providing such basic information. This is not a large country. Now, the committee also said it was vital for information to be made available to migrants on their arrival in Scotland so that they know what their legal and civil rights, civic rights and entitlements are, and to assist them in sourcing help and information so that they can have access to the full range of public services that will assist them and help make their transition to life in Scotland as straightforward as possible. Well, I agree with that as well. So how do we make it happen? Now, in 2009, the Scottish Government commissioned a report into migration in Scotland, which found there is evidence of poor employment practice, there are breaches of regulations on working hours, migrants have been found to have limited awareness of their employment rights. Many migrants are overqualified for the low-skilled and low-paid work in which they are predominantly employed. And the findings in the 2009 report also highlighted the need for more robust data with regard to Scottish migration. So I would welcome the Minister's comments on both the Equal Opportunities Committee report and the Scottish Government's own 2009 report, with a particular emphasis on progress to date. Deputy Presiding Officer, the migrant population is an asset to Scotland, and we need to do everything we can both to recognise and support that asset.
Thank you. And I call Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Modern United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil only exist as they do today because of migration, albeit imposed migration that failed to adequately respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. My great-great-grandfather Archibald Stuart left Stirling in 1852 to cross the Atlantic. Now I have some 400 or so living relatives in North America, more than I have anywhere else in the world. I have a substantial number of relatives in Australia. There's nothing uncommon about that story. It will be true for many of us here. Modern migration, of course, is of a rather different character. Much of it is coming towards us in response to our economic needs and the economic needs of the migrants. In my constituency in particular, we probably have seen 3,000 to 4,000 people come to the area in recent years, because we need people to fill the vacancies in many of our important industries. Unemployment is less of an issue in my area than elsewhere. Some of the problems associated with migration were immediately manifest in the early stages when single men came, and that created social pressures and opportunities for many of the unattached young ladies in Peterhead, Fraserburgh and other fishing communities. But now the pattern has changed, and it's important that the immigration system does not create barriers that prevent whole families coming. Because when whole families, when couples come, that is a much more stable form of immigration that is helpful both to the receiving communities, such as my own and elsewhere in Scotland, and to those who come to live and work with us. Now, there's some surprising side effects to all of this. I visited the Central School in Peterhead, the P6 class, a couple of years ago. 14 children in that class, 8 of them native Doric speakers, as is the case in the north-east of Scotland, and 6 of them native Latvian speakers, because for some reason the Latvians all seem to come to my constituency. Now, of course, the accommodation the children had found was they taught each other the other language, so they were all bilingual, and they spoke a hybrid Latvian/Doric language. The genuine difficulty, however, was the teacher had been no part of this process and was having substantial difficulty understanding what the kids were talking about. I found it hugely amusing, I have to say, and they tried to teach me a little of their new Lat-Doric language. They utterly failed to do so. I'm not much of a linguist. One of the things we will all meet from time to time is people who will make remarks about immigrants. I always respond very simply. If we send everybody home to the point of origin, what do we do with the 40 million Scots that we have to take back to Scotland? Immigration is part of the modern world, and it contributes to many of our areas. In my area, 10 years ago, we had 1/4 the number of dentists per head of population that Edinburgh did. Many of my constituents travelled to countries in Europe to get dentistry. You could not even get private dentistry facilities. Now we have lots of Polish dentists, and we have a stable dentist system. One example of the benefits. And of course, the Poles have been coming in waves of immigration. When I was a Boy Scout, my patrol leader was Zbigniew Clement Skrzycki. You can guess where he came from. I'm delighted that Ban Ki-moon has given an excellent statement supporting International Migrants' Day. I'm delighted we're having this debate, and I thank all those who've made it possible. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to discuss the important contribution that migrants make to Scotland's unique social and cultural identity, and I thank Christina McKelvey for securing time for this chamber to celebrate the International Migrants-Rights Day held on the 18th of December annually. And also wish her a speedy recovery, and thank Sandra White for stepping in to cover. I am confident that the majority of us will have been personally affected in some way by those who have moved from other nations to settle here in Scotland. In my region of Glasgow, I know that a huge number of individuals have a family history that extends far beyond the boundaries of Scotland or even the UK, and are proud of their truly international roots. Historically, Glasgow has been home to many Irish immigrants who sought refuge in times of hardship at home and have regarded Glasgow alongside many other parts of our nation as their home ever since. Today we can draw parallels between the Irish immigration of previous generations and the more recent arrival of those from Eastern Europe, from nations such as Poland, who have already made a profound and lasting impact on Scottish culture and identity. Scottish people are no strangers to welcoming those from other parts of the world to our country, and our historical experiences of the benefit this brings to our communities has, I believe, made us a far more open and inclusive society as a result. I celebrate the valuable role of immigration in Scotland through attending the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, formerly known as WESREC, and supporting local groups to challenge discrimination and stigma in their communities. Alongside my colleague Hanzala Malik, MSP, I am fortunate to be involved as a board member of the group and take part in grassroots campaigns to end racial segregation and promote diversity, particularly with young people across Glasgow and the west of Scotland. My work of the cross-party group on Poland has also enabled me to take part in crucial work to build links between ethnic groups and to better understand the kind of issues that immigrants who live and work in Scotland may face. Members of the cross-party group have invited professionals from a range of sectors to contribute to discussions on racial integration, and through these discussions we are able to coordinate cultural events and opportunities that break down barriers in communities. The CPG is currently planning some key partnership working with outside agencies and groups such as the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, and intends to further integrate support and advocacy services for Polish people living in Scotland. Migrants' Rights Day is about celebrating the invaluable contribution that those from other nations make to countries they settle in, and also presents an important platform on which to tackle issues of racism and discrimination in our communities. Though I believe Scotland is an open and tolerant society, where differences are celebrated and enjoyed, I also acknowledge that there remains an uncomfortable level of prejudice and misconception around immigration which must be tackled. I believe that through community activism and engagement we can continue to make significant progress in the campaign against racial and ethnic discrimination, and we can illustrate to the generation of tomorrow the profound importance of immigration and the cultural diversity that this brings to the whole of the Scottish society. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Humza Yousaf to respond to the debate. Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to thank Christina McKelvey for proposing the motion on International Migrants' Day, as well as many members across the Chamber. I wish her a very speedy recovery, and thank Sandra White for stepping in at such last minute, and also thank all the MSPs for extremely thoughtful contributions to what has been a very interesting debate indeed. I'd also like to thank Migrants-Rights Scotland for raising this issue consistently. In fact, they were early off the doors. They were tweeting yesterday about it, very excited in anticipation of this debate, quite right as well. Today we are drawing attention to the rights of migrant workers and their families, and raising awareness of the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1990. I think it's right that we
recognise this day. I want to be clear that the fundamental rights of migrants and their families are incredibly important, not only to migrants themselves, but to all of us here in this Parliament. Marginalisation and exclusion from participation in society and the denial of basic human rights to a family can only have negative results, something I think Helen Eadie made, a point that she made very well in her contribution. However, if we put the right policies in place, policies that reflect our values and aspirations as a country, that are welcoming, they're fair, they're forward-looking, progressive, immigration can be a tremendous positive force, as opposed to the somewhat negative, dirty word that it has become. And that was a point that was very, very well made by Mark MacDonald and others in their contribution. It can inject vibrancy, it can inject new ideas into our economy and culture, and encourage those that have come here to live and to work to play a full and productive part in the society in which we all live. But Mark MacDonald also made the point in his contribution that immigration is a bit more than just the economic boost, as important as they can be. Culturally, we, of course, gain so much from immigration. I come from Glasgow, many members here from Edinburgh. We have the Edinburgh and Glasgow Mellas that happen, a great fusion of different cultures. Not only that, of course, the cuisine, of which is something I've commented on often enough, that Scotland's favourite dishes being chicken tikka masala and spaghetti bolognese, two dishes that are from some of the biggest immigrant communities that have come into Scotland over the last few decades. I myself, very proud to be the son of immigrants to Scotland. My father, an economic migrant from Pakistan. My mother family had to flee Kenya after the uprising that made life very difficult for Asians in that part of the world. So very aware of the difficulties that are faced by migrant families, and also the real opportunities that draw hard-working people to Scotland to live and to work. Migrants-Rights Scotland plays an important part in ensuring people know their rights by supporting migrant community organisations to work effectively and to support people whose lives are fundamentally affected when these rights are abused or ignored. I know there's some members of Migrants-Rights Scotland, the Public Gallery, I think including the director, Pat Emsley. If anybody's met Pat before, somebody who has been a vocal champion for years of migrants' rights. Somebody who is, she doesn't mind me saying, somewhat petite in stature, but certainly doesn't pack a small punch at all when it comes to this issue, often saying what can be controversial but what needs to be said. I'll be looking forward to going to the event later on, the reception, and speaking there as well, and I commend them for the work that they do. Sandra White had made some really important points, I think, and I think this has been reflected by Annabel Goldie about our population, the demographics of our population. At 5,295,000, our population is now the highest ever recorded. This increase partly because there have been more births than deaths, but mainly because more people have moved to Scotland than have left. Not only do these statistics represent the fastest growth rate between two census years in the last century, but demonstrate that hard work to grow Scotland's population to support economic growth is paying off. But Scotland still faces many challenges in common with almost every mature economy. We have an ageing population, as other members have mentioned. We have a large established migrant community, and we welcome the contribution that new Scots are making to our economy and to our society as well. Our universities and colleges also benefit greatly from the thousands of foreign students who come here to study every year. Many of them will want to stay on and work in skilled professions when they graduate. Some will have met their life partners here and want to get married. Many more will return to their original countries with an impression of Scotland that will remain with them for the rest of their lives. But let me be clear that I want that impression to be a forward-thinking country that is open to new ideas, to technology, that embraces new people for the contributions they can make in many aspects of society. As you all know, immigration is a matter that is reserved to Westminster and dealt with by the Home Office. Scottish ministers want an immigration policy that reflects our Scottish values of openness, of equality, fairness, that are at the core of this government's vision. Sandra White asked about what discussions we have with the UK government. We have very constant discussions. I'm happy to ensure that she's written to update her on the latest of those discussions. But it has to be said, we have incredibly very little flexibility. I thought Annabel Goldie's contribution was very good to the debate, but it did have that glaring omission in terms of UK policy, which I thought was unfortunate, because we do have a UK policy that I think does not take Scotland's economic or social needs into consideration, offers no flexibility or able to reflect that regional variation, such as salaries, despite the Scottish Government's pressing for those flexibilities, regardless of where you sit in the constitutional debate. Of course, in a second, regardless of where you sit in those the constitutional debate, there is an understanding that we do have a need for flexibility up here in Scotland. But happy to
Annabel Goldie.
Very much for taking an intervention. I don't think this is the occasion to go into the pros and cons of reforms on the immigration front. I'm genuinely interested in what the Minister says about engagement, and what I would say to him is, it seems to me that what we lack is actual specific, what I think would be compelling data about where our migrant population is working, what skills and experience they're bringing to the economy, and I feel a very forceful argument could be made to the UK Government, and I would support the Minister in making that argument. Minister.
Annabel Goldie will know that this government is nothing if it isn't forceful when it comes to dealing with Westminster. But it is a serious issue. I do accept that perhaps there can be more data that can be collected to see the impact that migrants are making and where they're making those impacts and where they can hopefully make those impacts better. But immigration is one of those. I will in just a second, if I can answer this point. The member will have to be aware that immigration is one of those very few issues that's united the IOD, the STUC, the Scottish Refugee Council, because they believe that there should be some degree of flexible variation. Of course.
Drew Smith.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. When he next discusses these issues with the UK Government, will he undertake specifically to raise, if the Scottish Government hasn't already done so, specifically the issue around family visas and the very serious concerns that a number of us have in different parts of Scotland, but it concentrated also in particular areas of work. The Minister himself mentioned university students, but also the issue of academia, where there is a large number of people who would like to bring their partners or family members into the UK and now find that the UK Government's changes have almost entirely blocked that route, something that is very much to their discredit, in my view.
Minister, I'd be grateful if you could begin to come to a conclusion.
Oh, I will. Sorry, yes, time has escaped. But I take the member's point, and yes, next time I'd be happy to raise that issue with the UK Government. I think it's a very important one to make. Immigration policy should reflect the importance of the family life to stability and integration of migrants into our society. Stuart Stevenson, I think, made that point very well as well. And recent changes to rules on family migration are designed to severely restrict the number of people who can qualify to join their families in the UK. It puts people in an absolutely terrible and really impossible position as well. And that is, as Mark MacDonald was saying, really is a political point. But, you know, I suppose we are politicians, and so it's unexpected that we are going to make these points. But I think, for me, that is why we need to have control over immigration, be it through independence, and other members will say through other means. But that is not an end in itself, but as a means to achieve our vision of a fair and very inclusive nation that values the contribution that migrants can make and gives them and their families their basic human rights to a family life, as Drew Smith was saying. I believe independence will give Scotland the opportunity to make different decisions, to implement policies designed for our own needs, speak with our own voice, raise our own resources and take responsibility for our own future. The future is up for debate right now, and by engaging with those who will be affected by our policies, we hope to develop new policies that are relevant, informed by evidence and true to our principles. Just to answer Sandra White's very final point, and also Helen Eady's point, if that is to be done through a conference, I'd be happy to explore that. If it's to be done through any other way, of course I would be happy to explore that too. I just want to conclude by saying I think I want to send a very clear message to the world that Scotland welcomes hard-working people and their families who want to live and work here. We should be sending out the message from this Parliament under one voice that we are very much open for business.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Christina McKelvey's Members' Business on Migrant Rights Day, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.